Hello, and welcome to this interview with Stephen Spurrier. People in India know Stephen because he's no stranger to this country. He has been in wine for 50 years?
52 years.
52 years, and that says a lot. I mean, that's a wealth of experience. He's also a consulting editor for Decanter. He's a wine consultant, a writer, an author, and also now has his own vineyards and makes
Correct.
sparkling wine. He's also, I have to say, best known for something that happened several decades ago called the Judgement of Paris. For those of you who are not that familiar, Stephen held a blind tasting in Paris, where he was based at the time. And this was basically a blind tasting between California reds and white wines and French. And some of the best wine critics in France were present, and they voted for the American wines. That created a huge uproar, and I think it is possibly the most critical thing that has happened in the world of wine.
My theory about wine, which I've evolved over my many years in wine, is it's the 3 Ps. The place, so where vineyards are, is generally very beautiful or very nice. The people, who are generally very nice, and if they're bad guys, they'll make bad wine. And therefore the product. So the place, people and product all come together to make what we have in the glass. I couldn't imagine not drinking wine. The French saying, well, the saying, a day without wine is a day without sunshine. That's very much like that. To me, wine is part of my life. In fact, I'm writing my memoirs as we speak. I got up to when I'm 5 years old, so I've written the first 5 pages. But the title is Wine, a Way of Life. And so to me, wine has been all my working life. And every day there's something new. Every day well, it's not repetitive. And if it's repetitive, it's because you want it to be repetitive. You'll have another glass of that because you liked it so much the day before.
Right.
Yeah.
So that actually brings me to the way you have seen in the Indian wine scenario, whether it's the business of wine, or the growth of the Indian wine consumer and the interest in wine. For many years now, since you were chairman of the Wine Society of India, and you've seen it fairly close. Where do you think we are today? And how much growth has there been, really?
Well, I've been told that it's a good, solid 10% a year, which is strong. It's not as much. One of the reasons I came to India is I was at a symposium conference in Paris on emerging markets. And Don St. Pierre Jr., who had the biggest importing company into China, got up on the stand and basically said, for various reasons, the traffic lights are on amber for China. He was followed by somebody called Rajiv Samant, who I'd never heard of or never met. And the first thing Rajiv said, in India, the traffic lights are on green. And about 6 months later, I found myself in India, purely because Rajiv had said that. And I think in those days, this is 10 years ago, say, perhaps a little more, 10 years, the expansion was about 25%, but from a very low base. And now I think it's a good, solid 10%, but if wine consumption is expanding 10% a year, then it'll double in 7 years. Indian wines are much better than they were. The vineyards are in much better shape, and it's becoming an industry which is working from all points of view. Thinking about Eduardo, I then told Capel, I said, if I could get you Eduardo Chadwick of Errázuriz, you could create a label called E+F, Errázuriz plus Fratelli, which would be hands across the ocean, and that would be a wonderful marketing concept. Okay. Capel said, what a brilliant marketing concept. And I said, and if you do that, maybe I could follow on with doing something with Piero in a lesser expensive range calling itself maybe P&S. Yeah. But in the meantime, Capel said, well, why don't you come and blend a wine with Pierrot? And say we might have a problem with P&S, why don't you use our surnames, M and S? Which of course he did, and I said Marks and Spencer won't complain. So that's how it is. So luckily, Mazzi and Spurrier also are master selection. So that's it. That's the story.
And what has been your involvement with
Well,
blends?
each year I go out and make a blend with Pierrot. There's not a single drop that goes into an M&S wine without my having helped to blend it. We wanted a vibrant style. Often Chardonnay is, well, Chardonnay I would describe as a spherical wine, and Sauvignon Blanc as totally vertical. So what we've created is a spherical wine with a bit of verticality.
Yes, and a nice touch of acidity,
yeah.
yes. So what was it like working with Pierrot?
Pierrot doesn't speak English, and
Yes.
I don't speak
I
Italian.
don't speak Italian.
I don't speak Italian. So we communicate in French. But Alessio is the middleman. We speak the same language, wine-wise. So we're moving. We know what we're trying to do. But it's fascinating because we're totally different characters. 20-year industry, whereas in France it's a 1,000-year industry. Yeah. And I think there was also the belief that if you have a nice spanking new winery and a winemaker, all your problems are solved. Well, that isn't the case, because as we just discussed, the wine starts in the vineyard.
Yes.
So I think that winemaking intervention is becoming less and less. The great quote from Aubert de Villaine of Domaine de la Romanée-Conti, when somebody asked him how he made such wonderful wine, he said, we pick the grapes when they're ripe and do nothing.
Yes.
Yeah, but that's Domaine de la Romanée-Conti. So I think it's the realization that problems cannot be solved in the winery. It's absolutely wonderful that India, with this tiny but growing, emerging wine production, is creating a drink which is nice to drink and has value, and B, is creating employment.
This is true.
Yeah, and start creating something out of nothing, basically.
And we're looking forward to tasting the M&S wines this evening
Yeah.
with the Bangalore Wine Club at the Leela Palace. It's going to be a wonderful evening.
And communication is the absolute key. You've got to communicate all aspects of the wine business. Not just that Mouton Cadet is a good brand, so you must buy Mouton Cadet, but without communication, a wine market cannot grow. 20 or 30 years ago, there was the wine lake in France, and so many zillions of gallons just had to be destroyed. And even 10 years ago, the producers across the Midi were sending their wines to distillation because they couldn't sell them as wine.
Yes.
That no longer exists. Spain is still producing masses of inexpensive wine. They can sell it for €1 a litre and just about make money. And but anyway, they managed to sell that. So basically, the supply and demand in the wine world has equaled out, and there's more planting going on. The wine consumption around the world is going up, not by very much, maybe about 2 or 3% a year, or maybe 1 or 2% a year, because in France it's going down, in Italy it's going down, in Europe, but in Northern Europe it's going up. In America, the USA is the biggest wine market in the world for imported wines. And that's tremendous because the millennials have taken to wine. So I presented my wine at the Decanter Fine Wine Encounter this last November, which is happening next week. And for the first time in my life, I was on this side of the table, asking people whether they liked my wine or not. The volume of Prosecco made last year was 390 million bottles, compared to Champagne's 350 million. Well, I don't know where they make it, but anyway, the sparkling wine market is very strong, and it's been proved in blind tasting after blind tasting that English sparkling wines are as good as Champagne, which is obviously the bottle fermented sparkling wine we all compare ourselves to. One of the reasons is no one is going to plant in England on soil which isn't suitable for the champagne grapes. And no one, because it's expensive, is going to make a bad wine. The determination to produce quality, both from the vineyard, as I was explaining, and in the winery, is so strong that the average quality of an English sparkling wine is actually very high.
So tell us about your cellar, because people who would have heard about the Judgement of Paris would have thought you have a lot of American wines in your cellar, but correct me if I'm wrong, you're still a Francophile when it comes to wine?
I'm a Europhile, yeah. I have about 3,000 bottles or so. Occasionally when I go to a tasting I find a wine. I just bought some Nine Popes, Charlie Melton's Australian wine from the Barossa. But I don't buy them because unless I have really wine-loving friends around every weekend, with my wife and I, we don't drink them because it's not that she doesn't like New World wines, but she far prefers European wines. But then in London, I'm involved, exposed much more to international wines, and so I tend to drink New World wines in London, and I always drink European wines at home. So I have the best of both worlds. I mean, Boris Johnson, our politician, said his view on cake is that you should have it and eat it. To me, it's South America. It's Chile and Argentina are the exciting places for me, and a bit Uruguay. And Chile and Argentina are quite different because Chile has every single valley you ever heard of. Every time you look at Chile, they've got a new valley. So the variation, the variety in Chile is huge, but the intrinsic quality of Argentina is incredibly good. And then, of course, it's California, which is so good, Washington State, Oregon, Virginia on the East Coast, very interesting indeed. I mean, the world of wine for the consumer is a cornucopia. It is never, ever, often in life you look back and say, gosh, you know, things were wonderful, weren't they, 20 years ago? This is so untrue about wine. So utterly untrue about wine. Things are wonderful now.
Wonderful, and hopefully they'll get better.
Hopefully they can. I think they will. Yeah. Yeah.
But thank you so much, Stephen. And now
Well,
we have to go down
Ruma,
and drink some
thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you.